Welcome back to Twilight Tales, where truth meets justice and every story leaves you thinking. If you're just joining us, this is part 2 of a powerful real-life inspired story. Before we dive in, if you missed part 1, make sure to go back and watch it now. Trust me, you'll want the full context. And if this is your first time on our channel, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss another powerful tale. Let's rewind for a moment. In part 1, we met General Ava Richardson, a highly decorated black female officer with a 30-year military career, known for her sharp strategy and fearless command. Off-duty and in civilian clothes, she stopped by a local diner in a small suburban town. That's when everything changed. Two patrol officers, misjudging her presence and her identity, assumed she was a threat. Without asking questions or checking her ID, they handcuffed her, rough and loud, in front of stunned bystanders. When she calmly warned them that they were making a career-ending mistake, they mocked her. One even laughed and said, "Sure you are, General." But then came the phone call. From the back of the squad car, General Richardson dialed a direct Pentagon line. No one believed her, until 3 black SUVs pulled up minutes later and the air shifted. Authority, real authority, had arrived. That was where part 1 left off. Now in part 2 we'll see the fallout from that disastrous mistake. The national spotlight, the military response, the public outrage, and the career-destroying consequences for the officers who dared to humiliate a war hero based on the color of her skin. This isn't just a story about one woman. It's a story about a system, about prejudice, and about what happens when dignity meets power. It's about how one phone call echoed through the ranks of power, from a diner parking lot to the highest levels of Washington, D.C. So buckle up, because what happens next is shocking, powerful, and absolutely unthinkable. Let's get into it. The silence in the parking lot was deafening, until it was shattered by the screech of black SUVs arriving in formation. The two officers, still standing smugly by their cruiser, blinked in confusion. But General Ava Richardson? She simply looked at her watch. Out stepped men and women in suits, their earpieces flashing, their steps synchronized. They weren't just from internal affairs or local government. These were federal security officials, sent directly from the Pentagon. The ranking officer from the black SUV approached slowly, flanked by 2 agents. He didn't speak to the cops. He walked straight to the squad car, opened the door, and addressed General Richardson with a crisp salute. "Ma'am, we've been briefed. Are you hurt?" The 2 local officers froze. "Salute? Ma'am? Hurt?" The younger cop took a step forward. "Hey, what is this? We just detained a..." But he didn't get to finish. The federal agent turned toward him with steel in his voice. "You handcuffed a sitting 4-star general of the United States Armed Forces in public, without cause, while she was off-duty and unarmed." The officers stuttered, grasping for excuses. "We didn't know," she looked suspicious. "You didn't ask," the agent snapped. "You judged. You profiled. You violated protocol and federal law." By now, bystanders had their phones out. Footage from the initial arrest was already making its way to social media. A black woman in plain clothes being handcuffed while calmly identifying herself, and being ignored. The agents arriving in black SUVs? Only adding fuel to the viral fire. The senior agent looked back at the general. "We'll handle this from here, ma'am. Medical personnel are on the way." General Richardson stood tall. Her wrist still bore the marks of the cuffs, but her voice was clear. "No. I want them detained. Both of them. I'm filing an official complaint with the Inspector General's office. I expect full transparency and consequences." Her words hit harder than any weapon. The agents didn't hesitate. The same officers who had just been so confident were now being separated, their weapons taken, their radios confiscated. They weren't arrested, not yet, but they were ordered to remain on site and not communicate with anyone. The local police chief arrived shortly after, red-faced and sweating. "General Richardson, please, let's talk about this. We can handle this quietly, internally." "Quiet is the problem," she interrupted coldly. "Silence is how this keeps happening." That line was captured on camera. And it exploded online within the hour. By nightfall, news outlets from every network were calling the station. Protesters began gathering outside the police department. And the Pentagon had already launched an internal review. But for General Richardson, it wasn't about revenge. It was about accountability. If this could happen to her, a woman with stars on her shoulder and medals in her drawer, then what about the women and men who had no title? No uniform? No voice? This was only the beginning. And for the officers, their careers were no longer in free fall. They were in free fall without a parachute. By the next morning the headlines were everywhere. Black female general handcuffed, then called the Pentagon. Who really holds power? Small-town cops learned the hard way. When rank meets racism, a shocking display of disrespect. The viral video had already been viewed over 12 million times. National news anchors debated it on morning shows. Military officials were issuing cautious statements. The pressure was rising, fast. At the center of it all was General Ava Richardson, who wasn't hiding from the cameras. She held a brief press conference outside a government building in D.C. "We must address the fact that some of the people sworn to protect us still carry bias they refuse to acknowledge. I'm not speaking just as a general," she said, her voice firm. "I'm speaking as a black woman in America who has had enough." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. That same day, the Department of Defense issued an official request to Internal Affairs to launch an immediate, independent investigation into the officers involved. This wasn't just about excessive force. It was about racial profiling, abuse of power, and failure to follow proper protocol. 2 IA agents flew out from the Capitol to meet with the local police chief. The department scrambled, trying to protect itself, but the damage was already done. Every body cam, every radio transmission, every eyewitness account was now being combed through in detail. What they found only made things worse. One of the officers had been previously reprimanded for aggressive conduct and had once posted questionable memes about "who looks like a threat" on his personal social media. The other had a spotless record, until now, but Internal Affairs noted that neither followed even the most basic procedures for detainment or identification. Worse still, it was discovered that General Richardson clearly identified herself 3 times during the arrest, and was ignored each time. It was all documented. Inside the police station, morale was collapsing. Officers whispered about being dragged into the spotlight. The 2 involved, now suspended with pay, were being asked to surrender their department-issued weapons, ID cards, and access to internal systems. One officer cracked during questioning. "She said she was a general. I didn't think she meant that kind of general. I thought she was bluffing." The IA agent calmly replied, "So you admit you made the arrest based on your assumption, not on any criminal behavior?" The officer fell silent. Meanwhile, General Richardson was back in uniform, attending a Pentagon ceremony the next evening. As she took the stage, the room of high-ranking officials rose to their feet. She hadn't just survived the humiliation, she was turning it into a reckoning. One colonel whispered to another, "She's not just changing the story, she's changing the system." And he wasn't wrong. For the officers under investigation, the future looked bleak. But for General Ava Richardson, she was just getting started. The footage of General Ava Richardson's unjust arrest spread like wildfire. News outlets picked up the story, but it was the public's reaction that truly revealed the cracks in the nation's conscience. Social media was ablaze. On one side, there were thousands rallying behind her, veterans, activists, everyday citizens, demanding accountability and calling out systemic racism in law enforcement. #IStandWithGeneral Richardson trended globally. Veterans groups released emotional video statements. She led troops in war zones, and she was humiliated in her own country's parking lot. She's not just a soldier. She's a symbol of what black excellence faces in America. Influencers, celebrities, and even senators weighed in. One well-known journalist tweeted, "If a 4-star general isn't safe from racial profiling, what chance does the rest of us have?" But not everyone was on her side. Some corners of the internet launched vicious attacks, claiming she was overreacting, or that she played the race card. They questioned her intentions, her career, and even fabricated stories about her military past. A conservative talk show host said, "I don't care if she was the president. If cops ask questions, you cooperate." What they ignored was the video. The facts. The truth. She had calmly identified herself. They had ignored her. Repeatedly. In her hometown where the incident occurred, things were tense. Local businesses put up signs that read, "We support General Richardson." Others stayed silent, fearful of backlash. A peaceful protest was held outside the police department, drawing a crowd of over 1,000 people. A black mother who attended the rally held her 7-year-old son's hand and said to a reporter, "My son wants to serve this country. But I need to know, will this country protect him when he takes the uniform off?" Her voice cracked, but she didn't cry. She just stared into the camera, waiting for the nation to answer. Meanwhile, General Richardson kept her public response composed but direct. She refused to be framed as just a victim. She stood as a leader. "I'm not the first this has happened to. but I want to be the last. She was invited to appear on multiple national news shows. On one primetime segment, she looked straight into the camera and said, "If my rank, my service, my record of leadership still couldn't protect me from bias, what are we saying to every hardworking black woman in this country?" The room went silent. Petitions were launched demanding the firing of the officers involved. Over 1.2 million signatures were gathered in under 48 hours. A protester held a sign outside City Hall that read, "Not all wars are fought overseas. Some are fought at home, in silence." And now, thanks to General Richardson, that silence was broken. The entire nation was watching when the city announced an emergency disciplinary hearing for officers Brent Maddox and Karen Doyle, the two who had handcuffed General Ava Richardson. Held at City Hall, the hearing was open to the public. Cameras lined the courtroom. Military personnel, civil rights attorneys, journalists, and community members filled every seat. The tension? Palpable. At the front of the room sat General Richardson, dignified, composed, and in full military dress uniform. Her medals glimmered under the courtroom lights. The very presence of her uniform sent a powerful message. You may have stripped me of dignity that day, but today I reclaim it. The city's Internal Affairs Division presented the body cam footage first. It was damning. The video clearly showed her calmly stating her name and explaining that she was a retired general. She offered her military ID. It was ignored. Officer Maddox is heard chuckling as he says, "General? Right. You people always got a story." Officer Doyle adds, "Let's just get her in cuffs before she causes trouble." Gasps echoed across the courtroom. Even the mayor, seated in the back row, shook his head. Then came the testimonies. General Richardson spoke clearly and firmly. She described the fear and humiliation, but also the clarity she had in that moment. "I've led missions in war zones. I've faced foreign armies. But nothing prepared me for the terror of being invisible in my own country." Next came military witnesses, fellow generals, retired officers, and even a Medal of Honor recipient. One retired Navy admiral looked directly at the two officers and said, "You did not just insult her. You insulted all of us. You degraded the flag we fought to protect." The defense tried to argue protocol. They claimed the officers were acting in good faith and responding to a report of suspicious activity. But it was clear, they had profiled, escalated, and ignored all evidence to the contrary. Their case unraveled, especially when a local resident testified that she overheard the officers mocking Richardson even after placing her in the car. They said she was probably one of those fake military types, just trying to get attention. The room fell silent again. The final blow came when a Pentagon liaison stepped forward with an official statement. The message was short but powerful. The United States Department of Defense recognizes General Ava Richardson's decades of honorable service. She represents the best of us. To treat her with anything less than dignity is a disgrace to this nation. At that moment, even Officer Doyle lowered her head. After 6 hours of testimony, the disciplinary board took only 20 minutes to decide. Both officers were terminated immediately. A rare decision. But in this case, the truth was undeniable, and justice had to speak just as loudly as the injustice had. The courtroom erupted in applause, not out of revenge but relief. Relief that, for once, accountability wasn't delayed. And as General Richardson walked out of that courtroom, her head high, a young black girl standing outside whispered to her mom, "That's who I want to be." After the courtroom emptied and the applause faded, General Ava Richardson was escorted through a side hallway, away from the flashing cameras. Waiting for her behind closed doors was Mayor Ellen Ward, a woman who had stayed silent publicly throughout the ordeal. "Now it was time to speak. General Richardson," the mayor began, rising to her feet, "I owe you more than just an apology. I owe you accountability." Ava studied her for a moment before replying, "Let's not waste time. I'm not here for sympathy. I'm here for change." The conversation that followed wasn't political, it was deeply personal. Mayor Ward admitted what many leaders rarely do: she failed. She had received early warnings about that precinct's behavior, complaints from locals about profiling, and had even seen preliminary reports about officer misconduct. But she hadn't acted, afraid of backlash, of upsetting the police union, of disrupting the order. "I thought keeping quiet kept the city stable," she confessed. But all it did was let injustice fester. Ava didn't interrupt. She let the mayor sit in that uncomfortable truth. Then came the part that wasn't expected. "I'm resigning at the end of this term," Mayor Ward said. "But before I go, I'm signing a reform package named after you." Ava blinked. It's called the General Ava Act, the mayor continued. Mandatory bias training. A zero-tolerance policy for racial profiling. An independent civilian board to investigate misconduct. And a scholarship fund for young black girls pursuing careers in law enforcement and military leadership. That last part hit Ava hard. She thought about all the young girls like the one outside the courtroom, watching, learning, hoping. A tear welled in her eye, but she quickly blinked it away. I didn't fight wars overseas just to come home and fight invisible ones in my own streets, Ava said. But if this act becomes law, maybe the next generation won't have to. Before leaving the room, Mayor Ward extended her hand. General Richardson didn't shake it right away. She looked the mayor in the eye and said, "Change isn't made with handshakes. It's made with action. I'll be watching." Only then did she shake it, firmly, with purpose. As she exited the building, reporters swarmed, cameras clicked, and microphones extended, but Ava said nothing. Because in that moment, she wasn't looking for attention. She had something bigger in mind. She turned to her aide and said, "Call the Pentagon. I have an idea." What was it? A national initiative, one that would reach every precinct, every training room, every badge-wearing soul in the country. Because General Richardson was no longer just cleaning up one injustice. She was about to lead a movement. General Ava Richardson had faced many battles in her life, on foreign soil, in military strategy rooms, and within the walls of government. But nothing prepared her for this next mission, transforming the justice system from the inside out. Following her high-profile courtroom appearance and the mayor's private apology, Ava returned to Washington, D.C., not just as a retired general, but as a symbol, a voice, a leader. Her first stop? The Pentagon. She didn't go as a guest. She went as a reformer. She met with top military brass, the Secretary of Defense, and policy advisors. Her message was clear: we can't train our troops to uphold honor abroad, then allow dishonor and racism to flourish in the streets they return to. Then she turned her attention to the Department of Justice. Within weeks, General Richardson had partnered with both federal and state agencies to launch what would become the Justice Reformation Initiative, JRI. A sweeping national program aimed at training, auditing, and reforming local police departments. Key goals included nationwide mandatory anti-bias training, psychological evaluation requirements before promotion, a public misconduct database for all law enforcement officers, federal oversight of departments with high-profiling complaints, community liaison programs to rebuild trust between black communities and officers. And Ava didn't stop there. She toured across the country, speaking at universities, town halls, police academies, and even military bases. Her message: leadership means owning your mistakes, and fixing them before they cost someone their dignity, or their life. But not everyone was on board. Some departments pushed back. Some unions called it overreach. Online trolls spread disinformation about her past, twisting her record. At one event in Texas, she even received threats and had to leave under heavy security. Still, Ava pressed forward. Why? Because everywhere she went, she met people whose lives had been touched by her story. A black mother in Atlanta who thanked her for standing tall. A retired officer in Seattle who admitted she made him rethink everything. A high school girl in Detroit who now wanted to be a civil rights lawyer, because of General Richardson. This wasn't just a mission anymore, it was a movement. At a televised press conference 6 months later, Ava stood behind a podium flanked by American flags, leaders from across the political spectrum beside her. She looked straight into the cameras and said, "I wasn't handcuffed by 2 cops that day. I was handcuffed by a system that let them believe I was invisible. But I'm not. And neither are the millions of others who've been profiled, silenced, or ignored." Applause erupted. Some in the crowd were in tears. A reporter asked, "What should we call this movement?" Ava smiled. "Call it what it is," she said. Justice finally standing at attention. From a backseat of a police cruiser to the front lines of national reform, General Ava Richardson was no longer fighting a war. She was leading a revolution of truth. 1 year later, the same diner that had once echoed with humiliation and disbelief now buzzed with quiet anticipation. Cameras were discreetly tucked into corners. Local news anchors whispered into their microphones. And every booth was filled, not with regulars but with people who came to witness a moment that felt like justice turning a corner. At precisely noon, the door opened, and General Ava Richardson walked in. She wasn't in uniform. No entourage. Just her, calm, poised, dressed in a navy blue suit, her medals pinned modestly over her heart. Every eye followed her as she approached the same booth she had been sitting in the day she was wrongfully arrested. The same booth where two officers, blinded by bias, tried to strip her of her dignity. Only this time, they couldn't. Because this time she was there as a guest of honor. The mayor, police commissioner, and civil rights leaders stood as she entered. The diner owner, a humble woman in her 60s, had invited her personally and was waiting with a warm smile and a heartfelt apology. "A lot has changed in a year," the owner said, "and much of it started right here. With you." Ava gave a gentle nod. Change always starts somewhere small. But it has to be followed through. They shared a quiet moment, then sat down. Coffee was poured. Notebooks were opened. Because this visit wasn't just symbolic, it was productive. Ava was meeting with local officers, business leaders, and educators to discuss how to implement community-led policing initiatives. She wasn't here to relive the past. She was here to rebuild the future. Across the room sat a group of teenagers, black, Latino, white, watching her with wide eyes. One of them whispered to another, "That's her, right? The general?" Another said, "Yeah. She's the reason they changed the academy rules." Ava noticed. She walked over, crouched beside them, and said, "You all thinking of joining law enforcement?" A hesitant nod. She smiled. "Good. We need leaders who understand what justice really means. Not power, but protection." The boys sat up straighter. One of them extended his hand. She shook it firmly. And just like that, something shifted. Before she left, the owner handed her a small envelope. Inside was a photograph from that day 1 year ago, grainy and caught by a security camera. It showed Ava, handcuffed but unbowed, being led out the door. Beneath it, someone had written, "They thought they could silence you. But your silence roared louder than their hate." Ava placed the photo back in the envelope, tucked it into her coat pocket, and stood. She looked around one last time, at the place where it all began, and the people who now stood on the right side of history. Then she turned and walked out, leaving behind not just a diner but a legacy. Because sometimes the most powerful victories aren't won in courtrooms or headlines, but in the quiet places where healing begins. And that is how General Ava Richardson turned injustice into impact. From a humiliating arrest to a national reckoning, she didn't just clear her name. She ignited change. Not with anger but with strength, composure, and a phone call that echoed all the way to the Pentagon. What happened in that diner wasn't just about mistaken identity. It was about a system that too often fails to see the humanity behind the uniform, or the skin color. But Ava's story reminds us that when you know who you are, you never have to raise your voice to make noise. Your dignity does the speaking for you. She could have sued. She could have disappeared. She could have walked away. Instead, she showed up. Again and again. She showed up in meetings. In classrooms. In police academies. In community halls. Because true power isn't about revenge. It's about building something better in the rubble they left behind. To everyone watching this, ask yourself, what would you have done in her shoes? Would you have let anger define you? Or would you have let your legacy lead? This story isn't just hers. It's for anyone who's ever been underestimated, silenced, or judged before they were heard. If Ava's journey moved you, if it lit a spark in you, don't let it end here. Backhand index pointing right, comment below. What part of Ava's story inspired you most? Backhand index pointing right, like this video if you believe dignity can defeat discrimination. Backhand index pointing right, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that their silence doesn't mean surrender, it means strength. And if this is your first time joining us here on Twilight Tales, hit that subscribe button. This channel is about powerful stories, real impact, and voices that refuse to be ignored. Because the world needs more Ava Richardsons. And you never know, you might just be the next one. Thanks for watching. Until next time, stay strong, stay grounded, and never forget the power of your voice.